Are you looking for adventure? Do you want to find peace? Long-distance trails offer you freedom and discovery. They offer a way to connect to yourself and to the world around you at the same time. The most popular trails have become crowded, but there are so many other trails that have plenty of space. The Trails Around the World podcast is here to introduce you to new trails and to new types of trails and to expand your horizons. Join me as we explore, finding out what is possible and how to do it. Rather than discussing just one trail, this two-part interview is going to be a broader overview about through hiking in Europe. Our guest is one of the most experienced experts on the subject that we could hope to find. The first episode will cover our guest's background and how she got started, routes she has walked across Europe, what those routes are like, how trails in Europe are different from those in the United States or Asia or other places, and why, how seasons affect hiking in Europe, and the related issue of choosing to use lodging or to camp, pilgrimage routes such as the Caminos in Spain, and the trail community, or lack thereof, in Europe. The second episode will cover meeting people, the insights and experiences that one has while hiking in Europe, which are much different than those one has elsewhere, equipment, details about how to camp when you're hiking in Europe, electronics, maps, finding trails to hike and how to research them, paddling across Europe, the e-routes, which are the long-distance routes that cross multiple countries, wildlife, and cost variables and how to control them. Please enjoy the interview. Christine Thurmer, welcome to the Trails Around the World podcast.
Hello.
Thanks for coming on today. You've written 3 best-selling books about hiking in German. You have both English and German language blogs. Your German blog is under your name, I think, right?
Yep, correct.
And the English language blog is, if one puts The Big Trip into a search engine, it will come up. You possibly have hiked more miles than any other woman alive today. Quite likely, in fact. And your total at this time is about 53,000 kilometers, which translates to 33,000 miles. You've also bicycled 30,000 kilometers and paddled 6,500 kilometers. And all of these totals are since 2004, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. This covers many of the long-distance trails around the world. So with so much to choose from, we discussed ahead of time what we might discuss here. And we're going to talk about through hiking in Europe as a general topic and how people can approach it, what is different about it, etc. So let me turn this over to you a bit. Please tell us about yourself. What's your background? What's your adventure resume? Please go ahead.
So first of all, congratulations on pronouncing my family name correctly. I'm indeed called Christine Thurmer, which is for non-German speakers spelled Thuermer. But it's much easier to call me by my trail name, which is surprise, surprise, because I'm from Germany. I'm called German Tourist. So this is my trail name since 2004. So what's my background? When I was born and raised and making a career, it was definitely not foreseeable that I'd become a professional long-distance hiker. I was like really in physical education. It was a nightmare for me. I'm the most non-athletic person you can imagine. So instead of romping in the outdoors, during my childhood and during my young adult life, I was just building a business career. So I was working as a turnaround manager for several years before, basically by accident, I turned into a long distance hiker. And this happened in the US. This was back in 2003. I was having a sort of yuppie holiday in Yosemite National Park in California. And I was doing day trips or shorter trips. And I remember sitting in this commercial background in Yosemite in front of my way too heavy, way too expensive expedition tent. And of course, I did this. I was ending the day at 4 p.m. because this was like my holiday. And I was just enjoying it, not definitely taking it easy. And all of a sudden, these weird people turned up. Like, all dirty, sunburned, ragged clothes, very, very thin. And they had this minimalistic equipment. Some were cowboy camping, and I was totally intrigued. I was like, what are these guys doing here? So I went over and asked them, what the heck are you doing? And I didn't expect that their answer would change my life completely, because they said, oh, we are hiking from Mexico to Canada. We are hiking the Pacific Crest Trail. This was the first time I've heard about this trail, and I was immediately like smitten to this idea of like, what is this lifestyle? They were so enthusiastic with all what they told me about the trail and their experiences, their lifestyle. And I was like, wow, this is something I want to do myself. But of course, back at this time, I was this career woman. I was having a good job, having a company car, a secretary. And of course, you just don't dump a job like this for a bizarre idea to hike from Mexico to Canada. So back in 2003, two things happened that changed my life and made it possible for me to pursue this dream. First of all, I was fired, which in hindsight was the best thing that could have possibly happened. And secondly, a close friend of mine who was exactly 10 years older, I was 36 at the time, he was 46. He all of a sudden suffered from a stroke, ended up in intensive care in hospital, and died from another stroke several months later. And because I was just freshly unemployed, I had a lot of time, and I went to visit him in intensive care several times, holding his hand. This one question came up all the time, which he, of course, couldn't answer. He couldn't speak any longer. He couldn't walk. He could hardly swallow. But this question that came up was, of course, what would he have done at my age, knowing that this would where he would end up in 10 years? Would he have pursued his business career, or would he have changed his way of life completely and done something completely different? So, as I said, he couldn't answer this question anymore. He sadly passed away. But I remember one evening I left the hospital and I said, okay, I have to answer this question for myself. And looking at his life, and the answer was pretty clear. I remember going home and next morning booking a flight to the US and deciding, okay, this is what I want to do now. I will hike the Pacific Crest Trail. And this was the beginning of a very, very happy outdoor career. Despite the fact that I was overweight, that I'm not even free of vertigo, that I'm blind without my glasses. And I'm not your typical athletic person who can pull off a 2,000 mile long distance hike. But I did. So the Pacific Crest Trail was only the start for me. It was in 2004. I came back to Germany. I hiked, I traveled, I worked some more years. And in 2007, I was fired again from a job, which marks the beginning of my professional, so to speak, long distance hiking career. Ever since, I've been hiking, cycling, and paddling happily. So the beginning of my outdoor career was basically hiking the Triple Crown. I did this 2004, 2007, and 2008. And because I liked it so much, I continued with the Arizona Trail and the Florida Trail. And I would probably still be hiking in the US if there hadn't been the financial crisis in 2008. Because all of a sudden the exchange rate changed. And hiking in the US became more expensive all the time. In fact, hiking overseas became more expensive because I've hiked in New Zealand, I've hiked in Australia, but everything became so expensive now. So I said, hey, I've already hiked 3 times all across North America. So why not hike in my home country or in my home continent, which is Europe? And having lots of experience in doing big projects like hiking Mexico to Canada, I said, hey, let's think big in Europe as well. So my first big trip in Europe was hiking Europe from east to west and from north to south. which translate into a 16,000 kilometer trip. And to my knowledge, I'm the first person ever to hike across Europe in both directions, east, west, north, south. So north-south was hiking from the southernmost tip of Europe, which is Tarifa in southern Spain, to the North Cape in Norway. And east-west was a bit more difficult because there's no exact geographical eastern end or eastern frontier of Europe. Is it Russia? Is it the EU? What is it? So for me, it was hiking from Santiago de Compostela in Spain to the Black Sea coast in Bulgaria. So ever since the euro hasn't recovered that nicely as I wanted to, so I'm still sort of stuck here in Europe. I've last year Corona screwed up all my traveling, my hiking plans. So right now I was just doing my fourth European traverse, and this time I hiked from the German-Polish border all the way to Sicily. So altogether, I've hiked, as you just said, 53,000 kilometers or 33,000 miles. But not only that, because I still have this business mind. So I said, okay, if you have a critical resource, which is my health, you cannot be dependent on one thing only. You have to do some sort of risk management. And risk management for me was, okay, what do I do if I sprain an ankle or if I have whatever health problem that could prevent me from walking? So I diversified into hiking and cycling as well, because with a sprained ankle, with a healing sprained ankle, I can't walk, but I can possibly paddle, which some year even happened because I sprained my knee, or I injured my knee after a hiking trip. So I just changed into my canoe, to my kayak, and started paddling. So I've also cycled 30,000 kilometers. I cycled all across Australia. I've cycled all across Japan and Korea. I cycled all around the Baltic Sea coast, and I've paddled a bit. Paddling a bit means I've paddled the Yukon, I've paddled the Mississippi, I've paddled across Sweden. So right now my life changes always between 6 months on the road or on the hiking trails or on the bike trails. But mostly I'm still hiking, and 6 months staying at my home base in Germany, because as you have already mentioned, I've written 3 best-selling books. I'm currently writing my 4th book. And I'm proud to say that I'm not only that they have not been only published in German, but also in Korean, in Russian, and in the Czech language. So I'm writing books, and I'm also doing presentations. I'm a speaker. And of course, right now I'm planning my next hiking trips, which is difficult because nobody knows what Corona will permit me to do next year or not. So this is in a nutshell my hiking or my outdoor resume.
Thank you. What about hiking makes you love doing it? What is special about hiking, or let's add the cycling and the paddling, because these are also human-powered travel and have more similarities perhaps than differences to a long-distance hike?
Well, I could actually talk for hours alone on this topic. And in my latest book, there's an entire chapter just about like, why should you go hiking? And it's not only one factor, it's several factors. But again, in a nutshell, each of these factors just leads to one thing. It makes you a happier person. So the main factor too, because we want to talk about hiking in Europe mainly, so I want to cut this a little bit shorter than talking for hours. The most important factor is what I would call it, that hiking or my outdoor life in general, it lowers my threshold for happiness. Okay, I'll have to explain this. Like, especially when you're hiking, and I'm an ultralight hiker. Everything I need, all my material possessions just fit into a small, tiny backpack and weigh just 5 kilograms. And I've learned after all those years that this is really enough, not only to not only survive, but also lead a very happy life outdoors. So when you lower all your standard to such a low basic survival level, all of a sudden, everything that exceeds this standard becomes pure luxury. So things that normal people take as normal, like getting up from a bed with a mattress and taking a shower and going into the kitchen and make a cup of tea, all these things that are normal to normal people, for me, all of a sudden become luxury. So after hiking 1 week in the desert, not being able to wash yourself, sleeping on a sleeping pad, all of a sudden you come to town and you go to a hotel and you have a mattress and you can stand under the shower. I remember standing under a shower and just singing with joy because this is such an overwhelming physical happiness. So once you've learned this, you look at life from a different perspective. Everything makes you happier. This also translates into my normal life, into the 6 months when I'm back in my home base. So everything makes you happy, and it makes me a so much happier person. So this is the main reason why I keep hiking and hiking and hiking, because hiking taught me to be happy with little things. It changed my perspective.
Well, I certainly agree. I've had this difference with people where I feel like luxury is relative. And so there's no true luxury without having been in an unluxurious situation to counter that. And so, yes, it does give you that capacity to enjoy the luxury more.
And the second part of your question was, what is special about hiking? I think all these three means of transportation, like hiking, cycling, and paddling, they all make me happier. They all lead to the same result. But hiking has the lowest threshold because with hiking, everybody can go hiking. Whereas it's a little bit more difficult to go paddling.
Mm-hmm.
And with paddling and with cycling, you need a lot more equipment. You need more technical skills. You have to be able to repair a flat tire. You have to be able to do basic paddling strokes. You have to transport your canoe to like where you want to go paddling. With all the other means of transport, it's a little bit more difficult. Whereas with hiking, you just put on your little backpack and you just go. So you need to invest very little money, and you get more or less instant satisfaction. Once you start hiking, even on day one, there's you will start feeling this happiness. Whereas with paddling, it takes a long time to get to where you put in your boat, until you have assembled your boat, until you have put everything into your canoe, and until you've capsized the first time. So it's a lot more difficult. There's a lot more technical obstacles in your way to happiness, on your course to happiness. So this is why hiking is so easy. This is why it's my first love, and it's also my biggest love. So this is what's special about hiking.
Right. How long have you been hiking? We talked about 2003, 2004. Did you do a lot of hiking before that?
No, not whatsoever. It's, as I said, I was a total couch potato,
Mm-hmm.
and well, I've done. This is why I ended up in Yosemite Park when meeting these first through hikers. I told you about this incident in 2003, but I didn't have a athletic or an outdoor or sports background whatsoever. So really, my hiking career started on April 21st, 2004, when I stood in at the Mexican-American border
Right.
and started my through hike going towards Canada. So this is the start with not much hiking background before that.
Do you feel like you had somewhat, well, we've all seen the movie Wild, which both you and I started the Pacific Crest Trail long before the movie was made and before Cheryl Strait even did her hike, I think. I'm not sure which year she did it. But certainly long before the movie came out, both you and I were familiar with the Pacific Crest Trail, but it shows her experience of starting out with heavy equipment, not knowing what she's doing, and exposing herself in some ways to certain risks that were unnecessary because of her inexperience and not having studied things beforehand. And do you feel that you had an experience similar to that, or were there other learning experiences along the way that shortcutted you to knowing more when you started?
Not at all. Not at all. I was completely different from me. And this is where my business background comes in.
Uh-huh.
I took on this hiking project like I took on every single business project I've managed before. I did research. I planned resources, I planned dates, I planned the finances. So right at the beginning of my research trip on the internet,
Mm-hmm.
became very clear to me that there is one major success factor for a long distance hike, and that is lower your pack weight.
Right.
So I spent the preparation for this first PCT through hike consisted mainly in sitting in front of my computer, finding ultralight gear and cutting weight. I didn't train. I didn't go to the gym. I didn't go on test hikes. I just ordered equipment. So when I stood there at the Mexican border on April 21st, 2004, my base weight was already down to 5 kilograms. So I was already ultralight. And so after 2 weeks on the trail, I didn't have a single blister, nothing. Uh, Even after 3 weeks on the trail, it became very clear to me, this is it. This is what I want to do. I didn't have any problems. Of course, I had some sore muscles, but I didn't have any major physical problems because I already started out ultralight, and I knew after 2 weeks, this is it. I want to do this. It was not a question of if I want to hike, if I hike this Triple Crown. It was only the question, when do I hike the Triple Crown? When do I complete it? So I had a very, very different experience from Cheryl Strait. And the other experience is Cheryl Strait started her hiking career because she was basically running away from her really screwed up normal life. And this was very different from me because I really enjoyed, I had a very stressful business life, but I really liked it. I had a great time. I don't regret anything. It was perfect. I just said, okay, I've done a career. I know how it works. So I can either now pursue this business career for the next 20 years, or I can do something completely different and use my life, because this resource lifetime is pretty short. So I have to know exactly what I want to do with this very, very rare resource. And this is why I started to become when I studied long distance hiking, it was not running away from something. It was saying, okay, I've done this, great. Now I want to do something else that is great too.
Yep. Running to something instead of running away. I hear
Exactly.
that. Yeah. So moving to discussing through hiking in Europe specifically, as opposed to other places, and if one looks on your blog, you do list what through hikes you've done and when. And so listeners can go and do that themselves. But I mean, the last 4 or 5 years, you've been quite focused on these long hikes traversing Europe, and you're crisscrossing it one way, then the other way, and then diagonally this way and diagonally this other way. So, what varieties of terrain and scenery do you see across Europe? And you've been in Australia and you've been up and down the United States, so you can compare a bit to these other places. You know what is there and what's not there.
Well, so first of all, this gets me to the main difference between hiking in the US and hiking in Europe. So the variety in different landscapes, climate zones, fauna, flora, it's very comparable. It's really, you see the same kind of variety, either hiking from the Sonoran Desert to the Rockies in Canada. It's the same hiking from Tarifa in southern Spain to the North Cape. It's because it's the same, how do you say, climate, you're traversing the same climate zones. So there's a lot of the same kind of variety. But the main difference is when I hiked from Mexico to Canada in the US, the scenery changed, but the food, the language, the culture stayed the same. I was eating at McDonald's and other fast food joints all the time. It was basically the same food. Everyone spoke American English, and the culture was pretty much the same. So this is completely different in Europe. When I hike from Tarifa to the North Cape, You start out with red wine and tapas. You come to the French vineyards and castles at the River Rhine, and end up with eating dried elk meat in Norway, and eating rye bread with butter there. So it's a complete different culture, culinary wise, culture wise, different languages, different history. It's a complete change. So this is what makes Europe, or hiking in Europe, a lot more varied than hiking in the US, because you have this additional factor. But the other difference is also like that, and I don't want to avoid this topic either, that of course in Europe you have a lot less wilderness. Whereas in the US, you're always in some national park or in some sort of wilderness area, or most of the time in some wilderness area. There's hardly any wilderness left in Europe, which doesn't mean that there is any adventure in Europe. On the contrary, you have a lot more adventure, but it's not the type of adventure that you'll encounter wild animals, or that you're lost in the middle of nowhere and don't know where to go. There's always a trail, there's always a road. But again, this doesn't translate into less adventure. On the contrary, it translates into more adventure in Europe.
Mm-hmm. So you say more adventure. I certainly understand what you're saying with the transition of cultures, and I had not myself thought of that aspect, that how different it is from the U.S. or Australia in that way. Certainly, if one is driving, but yes, walking, of course, much slower, and so one sees it more gradually. So, how else do you mean that there's more adventure?
Well, adventure in many aspects. First of all, the first adventure aspect is that let's start with hiking in the wilderness in the US. In the US, you see basically wilderness and nothing else. So you see a lot of trees, a lot of mountains, a lot of lakes and streams, but that's it. So if you just go on the Pacific Crest Trail and come back to Europe, and someone asks, "Oh, how's the US? What is their history? What is their culture?" You can probably tell about eating chocolate bars and fast food, but this is mostly the only thing you learned about American culture, because all you've seen is trees, lakes, mountains, and streams. Okay, so now let's go to Europe and see what happens there. You go hiking, and every once in a while you'll encounter, not every once in a while, basically more or less constantly, you'll encounter something, some reference to the culture, to the history of this country. You'll see a chapel, you'll see old milestones, you'll see ruined farmhouses, you'll see signposts, you'll see God knows what, and everything will point to the culture and the history. Because all these milestones, stations of the cross, chapels, they were all built centuries ago.
Mm-hmm.
There will be graveyards, there will be tombstones, they will say something, you will read it, you will be surprised, because you see, oh, why is there this German inscription on a tombstone in Romania? Which happened to me. I said, what's going on here? Until I realized there were German settlers in Romania 250 years ago. Mm. Or you will see a war memorial and you see, okay, this was the front line of Second World War in winter 44, 45. So everything a lot of things you'll encounter, even in nature, will point to culture and history. So when you come back from a trip to Europe, you will have a lot to tell, not only about the history and culture, but also about the food. Because you go to a supermarket in Spain and you go to the same supermarket chain in Germany, but what the product range will be different. In Spain, they'll sell you a lot more red wine and a lot more horrible bread than they will do in Germany. In Germany, you will get beer and you will get rye bread. So it's even small things will change and will teach you a lot about the history. Mm-hmm. Also, the people you'll meet, they will tell you something about what happened to them. You will see fruit plantations, you will see vineyards, you will see huge fields, huge monocultural fields. You will see small fields. Everything you see will tell you something about the culture, mm-hmm. And this is the main difference.
I know I hiked the GR5 from Switzerland down to the Mediterranean, and a good deal of the southern part of that runs along Napoleon's reinvasion route when he came back from Corsica, and it's also a frontier area along the spine of the Alps, and it's the French-Italian border for much of its length. And of course, those countries were on opposite sides in the last war, and so there are bunkers and machine gun nests and forts and castles along the entire route. And then, of course, sometimes one realizes that one is walking on an old Roman road. So, all these things, all these layers of history that one passes through. As you're saying, to me, it adds a great deal to have that historical and cultural element in addition to the wilderness. And of course, in the high mountains, one also has the wilderness still.
Of
Um,
course, of course. Another big difference between Europe and the US goes back to our different law systems.
mm-hmm.
Let me just give you some numbers to see what I'm driving at.
Okay.
The entire US, which is 80 times bigger than small tiny Germany, has a hiking or a trail net of, I think it's about 300,000 kilometers, the entire US. And Germany, which is 80 times smaller, has the same amount of hiking trails.
Mm-hmm.
So let that sink in. And I now explain why this has happened. In the US, the property law says if this is private property, you are not allowed to go there. So hiking in the US or in North America is limited to public land, national parks or public land. That's it. So there's great national scenic trails, fantastic, but this is basically all you can do. Once you've done all these national scenic trails, there is a very limited network. So in Europe, on the other hand, basically the rule of thumb is if there's a trail, you can hike it,
Mm-hmm.
no matter if it's on private property or not. And this again goes back to property laws. And I have to go back in history now to explain this. In many European countries, the inheritance laws or succession laws were like, okay, if the father dies, the property will be split up into small sections for every son. So the plots of lands became smaller and smaller and smaller. So in order to access your plot of land, you naturally had to pass through other people's plot of land. So if you would apply the American system, this is my land, you cannot pass through. Nobody would be able to access their plot of land. So over the centuries, it became clear that you cannot say, okay, you cannot trespass or you cannot go through here, because the whole system wouldn't work. So this means if there is a trail, everybody can pass because everybody needs to pass to access their land. And this is what happened more or less all over Europe, except Britain. Britain is a bit different because Britain is not so much agriculture. It's almost more like cattle raising. So there, these big plots of land still existed, and they had to fight for their right to roam in the 19th century. But all over Central Europe, the system was like, okay, because the farmers had to go there anyway, they had to use these trails, everybody could use the trails.
Mm-hmm.
So this means there's an endless possibilities for the hiker,
Right.
because all these forest roads, all these roads between fields are accessible, no matter if they're on private land or not.
Mm-hmm.
So this gives you all this endless variety. And even like I don't have to follow a specific trail. If I want to do a shortcut, I just do. If I see a trail on the
Right.
map, I just do it.
Right.
And this is really what you have to, if you're a foreigner or if you're a North American coming to Europe, this is what you have to keep in mind. You don't have to worry about trespassing on private land. You can go there, which is what is also helpful is that we have different gun laws. So, whereas in the US, everybody can carry a gun, which means if you're caught trespassing, this could have fatal consequences for you. Your chances of encountering a farmer with a gun are pretty low in Europe because nobody has a gun. So nobody can shoot you by when you're trespassing. So the risk of actually having serious consequences or getting into serious consequences when you're trespassing is pretty low. The most likely thing that will happen is that the farmer says, oh, you're not supposed to be here, get out, and that's it. So there's no serious consequences to expect. Also, the law in Europe, or more or less all over Europe, says that forests, no matter whom they belong to, have to be accessible. So even if you're in a privately owned forest, you are allowed to go there, you are allowed to pick flowers, you are allowed to pick fruit and mushrooms. So nobody, even going cross country, is allowed. Only if it's a sort of protected area, protection for wildlife, then you may be asked to stay on trails. But other than that, you can even roam freely in the forest, even if it's private property. So, as I said, this is fantastic. There might not be much wilderness left in Europe, but what we have nature-wise is accessible to everyone. Just because Europe is so populated, so there is so much pressure from people. Oh, we want to go out in nature, that it has to be made accessible for everyone.
Those are enormous differences, and as you're saying, in a sense, increase the freedom.
Yes, of course. You also have to keep in mind that 95% of the forest in Germany, and I think it's the same number in the rest of Europe, 95% of the forest area is used commercially. So you're not talking this pristine old growth forest. It's nice, it's still a nice forest, but it's used for commerce. So it's used for timber will be cut. There will be foresters. There will be harvesters. So because it's used commercially anyway, the laws are not so strict because this is not a pristine forest. If a harvester can go in, you as a single person can go in as well.
Right.
So this, as I said, it's a totally different concept, and this commercial use translates into, okay, there's not much wilderness, but what we have is accessible. So this is also a main difference you always have to keep in mind.
Well, and I know one other aspect of that is that in the United States, as a human being, we are the most dangerous animal, but we are not the biggest animal in the woods. And there are many, many jokes about bears and worrying about the various larger creatures. And it's not that there are none in Europe. I think the bears are mostly gone. At least out. I mean, as one moves east, there are bears. But the wolves have been coming back a bit, and I know hiking in the French Alps that there were a couple of places where wolves were something to be a bit concerned about if one was going to be caught out after dark. Certainly, the farmers are using special dogs to avoid having problems with wolves in terms of their livestock. But perhaps wild boars would be a problem in some places, but generally, one's concerns about wildlife in terms of being a threat to oneself as a hiker are almost zero in Europe.
Exactly. I agree with that. Wild boars is what you encounter all the time, but they are not a problem. And again, as a hiker, you have to keep in mind one thing, because this forest is commercially used. It also means that the hunting rights are commercially used.
Mm-hmm.
So wherever you go, you will see these hunting hides, these hunting blinds.
Right.
So there are hunters everywhere, and this translates into the wildlife is used to hunters, which means they try to avoid humans.
Right.
So there are a lot more bears and wolves. There's even wolves in Germany right now. We
Uh-huh.
have more than 150 wild wolves now in Germany. They become
Right.
a big threat to sheep owners.
Right.
Um, but they don't pose a threat to hikers because they're just so shy.
Right.
Actually, there is just two animal threats for hikers in Europe. The first one is obvious: it's dogs,
Right.
especially in Eastern Europe, where there is guard dogs or sheep dogs everywhere, and they do their job very very nicely. So don't mess with any sheepdog. So I was once bitten by a dog. I never had any problems with animals in the US, but in Sweden I was bitten by a dog.
Really.
And the second problem is ticks,
Yep.
Lyme disease. So this is actually my biggest fear in hiking in Europe, because Germany is a high risk country for Lyme disease. But other than that, there is surprisingly more wildlife than you would think, but it doesn't pose a threat to you.
Right. Yeah, I was going to touch on the ticks as well. When I was living in Europe, certainly ticks had become an issue, and a friend's child got Lyme disease, and people say that the most dangerous animal on the Appalachian Trail is a tick, you know, and
For sure, for
that's
sure.
probably become true in Western Europe as well at this point, which is a shame. What is the best season for through hiking in Europe? And what are the pros and cons of other seasons?
Okay, now we get to before I get to this, there
Yep.
is another difference
Uh-huh.
between hiking in Europe and hiking in the US,
Good.
which has a big influence onto this question. In Europe, in most areas, you are pretty close to civilization. You're not in civilization, but you're close to civilization,
Hmm.
which means you can easily go into the next village or town and stay in a hotel, bed and breakfast, or a refuge.
Hmm.
So I have to say this because the influence of this is that you can basically hike here year round.
Right.
You can even hike in winter, because if it's too cold or if it's too little daylight for camping, you can always go to a hotel.
Right.
So to answer your question now is you can hike year round,
Hmm.
except for, of course, alpine areas where snow cover, avalanches make it difficult.
Right.
But in lower altitude, you can hike year round.
Hmm.
In fact, when I hiked from North Cape to Spain, I hiked through Spain in wintertime,
Hmm.
because southern Spain in wintertime has still some sort of like favorable climate. During the day, I was hiking in t-shirt and shorts, but at night, of course, temperatures got down below freezing.
Right.
So I just camped less and stayed more in hotels. It wasn't a big problem as long as you stay in lower altitudes. What you should take into consideration, on the other hand, is the fruit season, because this is another advantage of hiking in Europe. You are hiking through cultivated land or formerly cultivated land. In Europe, of course, people have fled from the countryside to the big cities because life is easier in the cities. So but this means that you hike a lot in areas where there have been living people, there have been farms, there have been fields, but people have abandoned them. They have abandoned the farmhouses and the fields, but they left behind the orchards and the fruit trees.
Hmm. Right.
You see what I'm driving at
Oh,
now.
I do.
So, for example, this year I've hiked through Italy, and Italy, this trend from leaving, abandoning the countryside and going to the cities is enormous. All the villages are half abandoned. There were like ruined farmhouses all over the place, which means there were fig trees, vineyards, apple trees, plum trees, orange trees everywhere. They
Hmm.
were abandoned. So I didn't even technically steal the fruit. They were just there. Nobody was harvesting them.
Right.
I've been eating kilograms of figs every day because they were just there. So season-wise, I would take this into consideration, and because this gives you the possibility to have some free trail fruit.
Right. Yeah. I
So,
know in my interview about the Pacific Northwest Trail, and I heard this from a couple of sources actually, but one of the best parts of the trail is all the berries.
oh, you don't get a full belly from a couple of blueberries,
Yeah.
but if you have this abundance of figs, oranges, and grapes, it's just like this substitutes whole meals. It was just amazing. This is what I really love about hiking in Europe. And as I said, when I've hiked to the southernmost point of Europe in Tarifa, Spain, I started out in Germany in late August, and I finished in Tarifa in February.
Hmm.
And I always say I didn't only hike from Germany to Spain, I hiked from apple and pear trees in Germany
Right.
through walnut and fig trees plus vineyards in France.
Right.
I crossed the Pyrenees in November, which means I arrived in Spain or hiked through Spain in orange, mandarin, and coffee season. So it was amazing because I hiked through these amazing orange and mandarin plantations, and the farm workers, they were totally surprised to see someone hiking there. Not to speak of like this tall German woman. They were like, "What are you doing here?" And everyone really stuffed my backpacks with kilograms of oranges. Take some more, take some more. It was amazing. I mean, usually hiking in the US means you really don't get enough vitamins if
Right.
you're always eating this dehydrated trail food. But in Spain, like I had this abundance of vitamin C.
Right.
So it was just great. Not to mention that they always shared their wine with me as well. But this is just another side aspect.
Right.
So to come back to the question, really you can find a trail for every season.
Hmm. Yes.
I would keep in mind that there's countries like France where everybody goes on holiday in July and August. So I would try to avoid that.
Right.
If you hike in main season, this means the huts will be full, the hotels will be full, there will be a lot of people.
Hmm.
But because there are so many hiking trails, it's not like that there's people everywhere. It's just more populated, or the trails will be fuller than in other seasons, but it doesn't mean there will be traffic jams. But if you have the choice, I would avoid the main season for popular trails, and I would of course avoid hiking in winter in the Alps or the Pyrenees. But other than that, there's a trail for every season.
Well, and I know with the trails in the U.S., a major phenomenon is the social aspect, especially on the big three trails, which you mentioned, the Appalachian Trail, Continental Divide Trail, and Pacific Crest Trail, that the hikers, because of the seasons being such a constraint, if you want to get through in one shot in one continuous hike, that people tend to travel together, and so there's one time of year, a window of about 1 month, when all of the long distance hikers pass through on any of the given U.S. long distance trails. And of course, I know you hiked the Appalachian Trail southbound, which meant that you avoided
Mhm.
that in that case. But I'm perceiving what you're saying as that doesn't exist in Europe, right?
No, it doesn't exist because we don't have this trail community, or this is the one trail you have to hike. As I said, we have this huge network of trails. So it's not like everybody hikes the same Pacific Crest Trail with this very strict time window.
Right,
Everybody hikes this trail there or that portion of that trail. So there isn't this congestion
right,
because there is not the one trail. There is one trail everybody tends to hike, and maybe we go into this round now, which is about the Spanish Caminos.
right.
This is the most popular trail in Europe, and of course, everybody wants to hike there in summer.
Right.
Because this is especially the Camino Frances is the one main trail, the most popular trail.
Mm-hmm.
Also, this is the reason why I want to deter everyone from hiking it, because it's overcrowded, it's commercialized. For me, it's basically a nightmare because it's the one trail that everybody hikes the same path, and everybody wants to hike there in their summer holiday, which means it's totally congested in July and August.
Mm-hmm.
So if you choose one trail, don't go where everybody else goes. Don't do the
Right.
Camino.
Right. And as I understand it, the Camino is also a great percentage of it is on paved roads. Is that correct?
Yeah. And again, we have to go back to historical and cultural factors here.
Right.
Caminos, especially in Spain, follow traditional pilgrim routes. They go back to the Middle Ages. And now put yourself in the place of a medieval pilgrim. Back in these times, you wanted to get from point A to point B, meaning from your home place to Santiago de Compostela or to Rome, as fast, as quick, and as safe as possible.
Right.
Landscape, like nice landscape, untouched nature, this wasn't a point of your considerations. You just wanted to be fast and safe. And where you can go fast and safe, this is where nowadays all the train lines, all the motorways, all the major traffic lines go. So pilgrimage trails avoid untouched nature, avoid high mountains, because this was not safe and this was not fast. So the Caminos who follow these traditional routes nowadays follow train lines and motorways. And they also go through all the big cities, which the medieval pilgrim needed for protection, for resupply, for safety. But this translates into that you will hike through industrial suburbs for hours and hours, and that you will hike on pavement most of the time. And which is worst for me, that you will always be within earshot of a motorway or a train line.
Right.
So keep this in mind. A Camino is not the European equivalent to the Appalachian Trail. The only equivalent is that there is masses of people on each trail, a lot more people on the Camino, but you don't get wilderness or not even a lot of nature. You'll basically see bike paths, shoulders of highways, or back roads. This is where you will be hiking.
I'm actually recalling a bit of the interview that I had with James and Amy about the Tokai Shizen Hodo here in Japan. And the fact that the Tokai Shizen Hodo, there's an old route from Kansai or Kyoto to Tokyo that is the Tokaido, just meaning the Tokai Road. And there's a very, very famous series of woodblock prints showing points along this trail. And that route is now all roads. One would not. It used to be before the Meiji Restoration. Nobody had wheeled transportation, and so everybody walked these routes. Whereas now, Japan is perhaps one of the most infrastructure-intense countries in the world, and there are roads, trains, ports, etc., all through this route, and walking it would not be a pleasure. But the Tokai Shizen Hodo, which covers the same sort of area, but is just a little further up in the mountains, was built by the national government together with the prefectural governments, and is thus somewhat of a curated collection of hiking trails along this route. And I'm hearing you say that many of the trails that are available are much closer to this sort of curated collection of trails. The French GRs, for instance, which are not just French, they're in other countries too. But perhaps the e-routes, we can talk about that soon. But the old pilgrimage routes, particularly the ones across Spain, are are not that, and they're the old routes that were used for transportation, and therefore those transport routes are now paved, and they're not curated for a pleasurable walk at all. Does that sound right?
Um, Not quite. First of all, hiking trails in Europe are made for hiking. So they are always sort of curated and they try to put them into nice areas, which translates into even if you have to follow a road for a while, sometimes they even build a small hiking path next to it.
Right,
So you're off road,
right,
off concrete. So if you're hiking on a dedicated hiking trail, you will most likely be in nature more or less.
right,
What I was saying was, I was referring to caminos, to the special, to
right.
the,
Yes.
and of course, when the pilgrimage trails were revived, the organizers or the organizations tried to put them off the major highways. So you're not, or most of the time, not walking on a big highway on the shoulder of a big highway,
Hmm.
but you will still be in the same valley or in the same area as the major highway is. You will most likely be on a separate path, which will be paved or will be more or less paved, but you will be off traffic, but you will still be able to
Okay.
hear it and to see it. So
Right.
this is what I mean. They try the pilgrimage organizations try to make the pilgrimage trails hikeable,
Okay.
but they can't move the route to the high mountains or whatever.
Right.
It's still in the general area.
Okay. So it's a little better than the Tokaido would be now. But
Only a little bit, I think.
right. But as you're saying, the most hiking trails are much better planned and located for a pleasurable experience.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So we talked about seasons. What other considerations might there be? You were talking about food, and we talked about seasons, which is related. What other considerations might affect one's timing for hiking trails in across Europe?
Well, of course, it's the temperature. It's general the climate.
Yeah,
It's pretty obvious you don't hike in the Alps in wintertime.
right,
But it's also pretty obvious that if you go to southern Spain, which is the equivalent to Arizona or New Mexico,
right,
you don't want to go there in the heat of the summer.
right,
You could still do it. This is because the infrastructure is much better. You get a lot of water, you have shade along the way, but you still, or at least I wouldn't want to go there in summer. And so just look at the climate chart and see, okay, do I really want to hike in Southern Europe in the heat of summer? Do I really want to hike in Germany in winter when daylight is very little? There's another consideration is daylight. Right now, when we are recording this, I have less than 10 hours of daylight in Germany.
mm-hmm,
So I can still go hiking, but currently planning a short holiday hiking trip. And I will just hike from one accommodation to the other because it's just no fun to stay 16 hours in my tent because it's just pitch dark in sub-freezing temperatures.
right,
So I can still do it, but it's not the best season to go hiking.
right, or at least hiking and camping.
Hiking and camping, exactly. Also, if you want, on the other hand, if you want to go from hotel to hotel, hiking in the dead of the season in winter is also not very favorable because most hotels will be closed then.
Right. Okay. Right.
So, especially when you go to mountain huts, they are just closed in winter or even in the shoulder season.
Right.
So, if you rely on this infrastructure, you have to go when the tourist season is.
Mm-hmm.
Then, of course, there's a minor problem with hunting season. Like, of course, in October or even until November, hunting is very popular. So expect to run into hunting dogs all the time or fenced off trails because they say, okay, we're doing a big hunt here. You can't go through right now.
Uh-huh.
It's not a major issue, but it can happen. So during hunting season, you can have unpleasant surprises.
Right. Hmm.
But other than that, as I said, there's a hiking trail for every season in Europe.
Mm-hmm. So I'm gathering you usually hike alone, but would you discuss a little more your own personal experience of hiking alone versus hiking with others in the context of hiking in Europe?
Okay, first of all, let me explain my personal style, which is, as you have just mentioned, I'm always hiking on my own. If I hike with other people, I wouldn't consider it a through hike. I just do it for fun, or like as a holiday hike or a weekend hike. But if I go on a serious hiking trip, I'm always hiking on my own because I found out that my hiking style is not very compatible to others. I'm hiking very, very, very slowly. Everybody else is much faster than me, which annoys me. But I hike long hours. I hike from sunrise to sunset, and most other people who are faster collapse around 4 o'clock. So we can't go any further. Whereas I just have warmed up, and this is like when my best hiking time starts. So I just prefer to go hiking on my own.
Right.
So this is my personal style, no matter where I hike, where I go. But now coming to Europe, I have to mention that we are now touching another big difference between hiking in Europe and hiking in the US, which means here in Europe, there is no trail community. The only thing that comes close to the trail community is on the Spanish Caminos, because this is the only trail with a fixed route where everybody hikes the exact same steps and the exact same route. Other than that, there is also famous trails, but there is no through hiking condition, meaning you have to start at point E and finish at point B. Even if you are hiking a famous trail, people hike only portions of it, or they start here and there. The time window is much bigger. So, because everybody starts and hikes wherever and whenever he or she wants,
Right.
this is not good for creating a trail community. So, there isn't any.
Right.
So you might encounter other hikers, but they're on a different schedule. They don't hike the whole trail. So you're not bonding as much as you would bond on a US trail.
Right.
There's also no trail angels
Mm-hmm.
because you basically don't need them. With a supermarket around every corner and a hotel around every corner, there's no need for trail angels to cache water for you or to give you shelter or to shuttle you from the trail to the supermarket. You just
Right.
don't need that. And because you don't need it, there isn't any.
Right.
All these factors lead to no trail community. So when you set out, you will meet other people. You'll most likely encounter day hikers or section hikers, but hardly any through hikers.
Mm-hmm.
As an example, when I hiked through Eastern Europe, I hiked from Germany to Bulgaria for 4 months, and during these 4 months on an European long distance trail, on an established e-trail, we come to that later, I encountered 3 other long distance parties, 3. And I only encountered them because we knew from each other from social media. So we timed a meeting
Really?
via Facebook. Otherwise, we would never ever have met.
Huh.
So in 4 months, as I said, I met 3 other long distance hiking parties, which is amazing. Whereas like on the Appalachian Trail, you meet other long distance hikers all the time.
Right. Yeah.
So if you set out on a European long distance hike, you'll set out alone and you will end up alone because you just don't meet any other people. Again, this is totally contrary to the concept people have of Europe. People think, and even Europeans think, oh, Europe is so crowded, you'll run into people all the time. Whereas we have to go to the US because there you're hiking wilderness, you're all on your own. And the contrary is true. On the US trails, I met people all the time, because everybody hikes at the same time window. Whereas in Europe, sometimes the only person I speak to in weeks is the cashier at the supermarket.
Right.
Because there's no one on a trail.
Right. Right.
So hiking in Europe is a lonely business.
Well, how much opportunity I mean, many people coming from, especially coming from other places, we discussed that many of these trails do actually expose you to much of the culture in terms of history and archaeology and castles and that sort of thing. But it seems that there aren't necessarily that many opportunities to meet people. Personally, I did find that I was meeting people somewhat. If you stay in lodging, such as the refugees along the GRs in the French Alps, that there is a bit of a community there. There are other people who are also hiking, and sometimes people are headed in the same direction as you. And then you would meet people. But how much opportunity would you gauge that there is to meet either locals and you're saying that there isn't much for most, that you're not likely to meet other thru hikers, but how much opportunity is there to meet locals along these trails?
A lot of opportunity. Because as I said, you're hiking through farmland and you're hiking through commercially used forests.
Right.
So you'll meet farmers, you'll meet foresters, you'll meet hunters, you will work forest workers, you'll meet all sorts of people.
Mm-hmm.
And they are basically curious, what are you doing there? So you'll have a lot of encounters, and and usually friendly encounters. So
Right.
this is, again, as I said, like you will learn a lot about the history and culture because you meet these people.
This concludes part 1 of the Trails Around the World podcast interview on, or overview of, thru hiking in Europe. Please join us next time, and we will continue with the second half of the interview. Thank you for listening to the Trails Around the World podcast. Please visit us online at trailsaroundtheworld.com, and please join our Facebook group under the same name. If you liked this podcast, please help us out by leaving a review on your favorite podcast source, such as Apple Podcasts. This is Sky King, and I look forward to you joining us next time. In the meantime, happy trails to you, and please remember to leave no trace as you enjoy the outdoors.